There are a few things that we know about nutrition. We know that too much of it is bad for you and too little of it is bad for you. And we know that there are certain vitamins and minerals that are essential, certain amino acids that are essential, and certain fatty acids that are essential. And if you don't have enough of these things, you will develop diseases in short order. That's about the limit of total knowledge. Most people are overnourished in this country. That's simply the consequence of modernity paired to ancient genes. So there's no judgment in that statement. It's simply a matter of fact. We have genes that literally spent millions of years optimizing for energy storage. It is hands down the single most important feature that allowed us to be sitting here having this discussion now, as opposed to being extinct. If we were not able to store so much energy in such an efficient way, we would have never had the ability to develop the brains that we had, literally the size of our brain, which allowed us to leapfrog ahead of all other species. So this came down fundamentally to the ability to store energy. Now, up until about 150 years ago, there was no problem associated with that. And it was really only in this tiny, tiny sliver of time in the last 100 to 150 years when the abundance of food became so great that when you pair such food availability along with all the other things that came with it, less movement, less sleep, more stress, all of these things that also made things worse. When you couple that with our ancient genes, we have this epidemic. So the question becomes, how do you correct the overnourished problem? To do so, you have to understand two other variables, I think. The first is, where are you with respect to muscle mass? So I tend to classify people, once asking if they're overnourished or undernourished, I want to know, are they adequately muscled or under-muscled? And then another thing I want to understand is, are they metabolically healthy or not? Which usually relies on some functional testing, but also on blood testing. And basically, when you filter through all of those, you realize you are going to come to a nutritional strategy. And usually for most people, it means reducing total caloric intake while either maintaining or increasing protein intake. Those become the big variables. And then there are basically three strategies for how you go about reducing intake: dietary restriction, time restriction, caloric restriction. These strategies are not mutually exclusive. You can do more than one at a time, but they are basically collectively exhaustive. So dietary restriction is you pick a dietary boogeyman, one or more, and just restrict or eliminate that thing. So every one of the diets, whether it's keto or vegan or paleo or low carb or South Beach, like you name a named diet, all it is a form of dietary restriction. Pick this thing, don't eat that. Pick this thing, don't eat that. Pick these 5 things, don't eat those. The more restrictive the diet, generally the more successful it is in terms of weight loss, because you're simply restricting food choices. There's no question that certain diets are promoting more health than other diets. So the all donut diet is very restrictive, and you might even lose weight on it, but you wouldn't get any healthier on it. So that's why we have to come back to this. What are we doing for metabolic health in addition to just weight? Time restriction is basically limiting the window in time that you eat. So the narrower and narrower you make that window, the harder and harder it is to eat lots of calories. And so eventually you'll start to lose weight. But there's nothing really magical about time restriction beyond the caloric restriction. And then lastly, you have caloric restriction, which is deliberately restricting what you eat, but not necessarily paying attention to or restricting anything uniquely or restricting the time in which you eat. So again, those are basically your 3 tools. And for some people, boy, they'll swear by one or the other, and each has their pros and cons, but the reality of it is the data suggests they're all the same.